A monumental moment as the first Black, first Asian American, first woman to be elected as vice president took to the stage. Her all-white pantsuit paying homage to the women's suffrage movement that helped make this possible.
Tonight I reflect on their struggle, their determination, and the strength of their vision to see what can be unburdened by what has been. And I stand on their shoulders.
Throughout her race to the White House, Harris continuously gave credit to the Black women who've often been overlooked by history's gatekeepers.
And these women inspired us to pick up the torch and fight on.
By the 1890s, Black women, like all Black Americans, are acutely aware of the rise of a Jim Crow regime. Disenfranchisement, segregation, and racial violence are a strategy by which Black Americans, especially Black men, are being violently pushed out of the political sphere. Black women organize. Mary Church Terrell is the very first president of the National Association of Colored Women. It is an organization that permits them to work, yes, toward women's suffrage, but also, for example, against lynching in this period. Ida B. Wells is a legendary journalist, mastermind of the campaign against lynching that is launched at the end of the 19th century, a staunch suffragist who works at the national level, but also understands politics are always supremely local. By 1928, African American women will decisively send the first Black man to Congress since 1901, Oscar DePriest. Very much had women like Ida Wells to thank for that.
Nearly 2 decades later, women gained the right to vote with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. But for women of color, the barriers to the ballot box were still steep.
But they were undeterred. Without fanfare or recognition, they organized and testified and rallied and marched and fought, not just for their vote, but for a seat at the table.
Jim Crow laws and the threat of violence made it nearly impossible for Black people to vote in the South. But organizers like Mary McLeod Bethune didn't give up, leading efforts to mobilize Black voters often at great personal risk.
Her work will be impossible in Florida. The violence, organized Klan, terroristic violence is relentless. But by the 30s, she'll take herself to Washington and show us that there's more than one way to be a political leader. She will help Roosevelt establish what was colloquially known as his Black cabinet. She will become a federal appointee, along with dozens of other Black Americans who can't be elected to office by and large, but can come to Washington and be in charge of meting out robust resources that are helping the nation recover still from the Depression in the 1930s.
She needs no introduction. The ever-present autograph seeker.
By 1945, Mrs. Bethune is at the founding of the United Nations, the fateful meeting where the foundation is laid for that organization.
Mrs. Bethune is off to the San Francisco conference as a special consultant.
For Black women, the only way into American democracy was through the back door, and they fought on all fronts. The movement filled the streets, some took it to the ballot box, and others to the courts.
Constance Baker Motley is the woman member of the NAACP's litigation team that is whittling away at the Jim Crow edifice that is denying Black Americans their voting rights. This is the team that will defeat poll taxes. It will defeat grandfather clauses. It will defeat whites-only primaries.
In July of 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, making it illegal to discriminate based on race, sex, gender, or origin, a step in the right direction. But that same summer, Johnson tried to silence Fannie Lou Hamer, a daughter of Mississippi sharecroppers, at the Democratic National Convention. Hamer shook the establishment in her calls for the all-white delegation to become more representative as she retold the violence she faced trying to vote.
Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
And it was a Black woman that delivered a speech and called a party to toll about representation that not only benefited her delegation from Mississippi, which is what she was doing, but actually benefited Black Americans across this country. That was a ripple effect for generations.
Early on the morning of April 19th, the violence in Nashville reached its climax with the dynamiting of a Negro home. This was the residence of Alexander Luby, a city councilman and leading Negro attorney.
He was Attorney Luby. He was our lawyer. He came to our defense when we were arrested that day, when we really needed something, and somebody had tried to kill him. We felt we had to confront the mayor with this thing.
The movement was gaining a new momentum, and student activists like Diane Nash, who had helped lead sit-in protests and the Freedom Rides years before, set their sights on voting rights.
Diane Nash heads to Selma and works behind the scenes to organize locally, to organize nationally. On that fateful day when marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Diane Nash is not on the bridge because she is back in Selma making sure that the paramedics are on scene and will be able to attend to those marchers should they, as they indeed do, confront brutality.
The first of 3 peaceful protests from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, came to be called Bloody Sunday. Images of that day shocked the nation, pushing Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act. It was only then that all Americans truly had the right to vote.
In the wake of the Voting Rights Act, Black women are among those who are very eager to test the power of this newly enfranchised Black electorate. Shirley Chisholm from Brooklyn, New York, the daughter of immigrants, educated at Brooklyn College, founder there of the Harriet Tubman Club, named for the courageous, formerly enslaved woman who spirited so many enslaved people out of Maryland into freedom. This is Shirley Chisholm's foundation for her first run for political office in 1965, leading to her election to Congress in 1968, the very first Black woman to sit in Congress.
Shirley Chisholm's victory inspired more Black women to get involved in politics. Very early on, this included Representative Barbara Lee, who was elected to Congress in 1998.
I was a psychology major, but I took one class in government, and part of the course requirement was to work in a presidential campaign. So at the same time, I was president of Black Student Union, invited Shirley Chisholm to campus as the first, can you imagine, the first African-American woman elected to Congress. And during her speech, she said she was running for president. So of course, I went up and told her afterwards about my class. She said, if you really believe in change, you've got to get involved.
I stand before you today as a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States of America. I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am Black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman. I am the candidate of the people of America.
Very few folks expect that Shirley Chisholm will win the nomination in 1972, but in many ways, that's not the point, right? That Chisholm is there to really prove the full capacity of this newly enfranchised Black electorate from across the United States, and that she does.
She also knew that she had to do this. She had to break some barriers for women, for Black and brown people. And I remember one of her quotes about how this country was really losing out because they didn't embrace the views and the creativity of Black and brown people and women in the revitalization and rejuvenation of the country.
I know from my travels to the cities and small towns of America that we have a vast potential which can and must be put to constructive use in getting this great nation together. I know that millions of Americans from all walks of life agree with me that leadership does not mean putting the ear to the ground to follow public opinion, but to have the vision of what is necessary and the courage to make it possible.
Chisholm retired in 1991 and remained the only Black woman in Congress until 1973. It then took another 24 years to elect a Black woman to the Senate.
Can you tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
I think the one that was the most embarrassing was his discussion of pornography.
This hearing in 1991 inspired several women across the country to run for office. They watched as an all-male Judiciary Committee grilled Anita Hill on allegations of sexual harassment against Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas.
I couldn't abide the idea. It was just anathema to me that somebody who stood in opposition to everything that Thurgood Marshall had worked for would be the new Supreme Court justice. It's like, no. So I decided then I'm running for the Senate.
Ms. Mikulski, Ms. Mosley Braun, Mr. Murkowski.
In 1993, Braun became the first Black woman senator in American history.
I come to the Senate as a symbol of hope and change. And actually, for me, part of the dissonance or the difficulty was reconciling the symbolic nature of my being in the Senate and the job. I was looking to be normal as any other senator, but I recognized that I had a responsibility to be this symbol, which was something else altogether.
Braun would go on to become a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, but her term was marred by controversy, including allegations of misusing campaign money and helping her mother commit Medicaid fraud.
I spent the next 6 years trying to prove that I wasn't a fraud, that I wasn't a corrupt, I wasn't all the bad stuff.
Braun was never charged with criminal wrongdoing. In 1998, she lost her re-election to Republican Peter Fitzgerald. 5 years later, she ran for president.
So I was legislating or trying to legislate statehood for the District of Columbia when you were just getting your eyes open to this issue. I take second place to no one on this issue.
Carol Moseley Braun does not succeed in that nomination. And in that moment, I think, exposes a still present tension and even a rift in American politics, which is that she's not able to secure a women's constituency in the United States as a women's constituency. It was true, in Ida Wells' time, it was true for Carol Moseley Braun, and we might say it's still true today, that Black and white women, political behavior on Election Day is quite divergent.
Braun found it particularly difficult to raise money for her campaign.
It was grueling, and I was glad I did it because I met a lot of really wonderful people on the campaign trail, not the least of which were the fathers who brought their daughters, little girls, to see me debate. And they said, I just wanted her to see that it's possible for a girl to do this. And it was like, if that's my contribution, then that's enough.
Shirley Chisholm paved the way for Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson ran in 84 and 88, and he registered 9 million more people in the South. Paved the way for Barack Obama as an African-American man. Paved the way for Kamala Harris. And so this has been a trajectory. We all stand on each other's shoulders.
But none of it would have been possible had it not been for the Black women's vote. Their vote helped propel Barack Obama to victory in 2008 and again in 2012. And in 2016, it was the Black women's vote that helped Hillary Clinton become the first female nominee of a majority party.
She did what I was not able to do. She was able to show little girls that it is possible for a woman to be president.
And to all the little girls who are watching this, never doubt that you are valuable and powerful and deserving of every chance and opportunity in the world to pursue and achieve your own dreams.
But while Clinton did not win the election, her loss and Trump's victory sparked a massive movement. It would lead to unprecedented gains for women in politics.
In 2018, we had a record number of Black women running for Congress. In that election cycle, we elected the largest number of Black women to serve in Congress, and that was on the 50th anniversary of Shirley Chisholm.
Open the door. Hey, I ain't gonna stay long, baby, because we are campaigning for Joe Biden.
In 2020, Black women would again play a pivotal role in the presidential election, at a moment when Joe Biden's candidacy seemed doomed.
All right, good deal. Thank you so much. You be blessed now. Take care. Don't work too hard.
They were saying Joe Biden's campaign was toast and he was dead in the water and it wasn't going to happen. Then he turned around and won in South Carolina. It was Black women who carried him through in South Carolina.
When Joe Biden won the nomination, he vowed to choose a woman to be his running mate.
There are a number of women of color. There are Latino women. There are Asian. There are across the board.
He won that set of primaries that kept his campaign alive because of the input and the votes and the voices of these women who would have otherwise been marginalized. And so I just thought he really needed to pick a Black woman if possible.
Your next Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. Kamala, the floor is yours.
You know, my mother and father, they came from opposite sides of the world to arrive in America. One from India and the other from Jamaica, in search of a world-class education. But what brought them together was the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And my mother, Shamala, raised my sister Maya and me to believe that it was up to us and every generation of Americans to keep on marching.
Certainly all of my friends who went to historically Black colleges certainly saw themselves in Kamala Harris. Indians from across the country and across the globe saw themselves in her, and people saw the possibilities that exist.
When Biden and Harris won the 2020 election, they knew who to thank.
The African American community stood up again for me. You've always had my back, and I'll have yours.
For Harris, it was a victory for all the women that came before her.
Women who fought and sacrificed so much for equality and liberty and justice for all, including the Black women who are too often overlooked, but so often prove they are the backbone of our democracy. But while I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last. Because every little girl watching tonight sees that this is a country of possibilities.